Welcome to the interview on France 24, a venue for dialogue with the high-flying Latin American and international figures. Today, Felipe Gonzalez, former head of the Spanish government from 1982 to 1996. Mr. Gonzalez, thank you for being with us on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
You were and still are highly closely related to the Venezuelan government. You're critical of the Maduro government and the dialogue process in the Dominican Republic. And you put the role of your successor back on trial. We're talking about Mr. Rodriguez Zapatero. What does Venezuela need? Can we find a solution through dialogue?
Well, of course, we've tried to dialogue with the Maduro government that is governing tyrannically, showing no respect for the rules, institutions, or the people of Venezuela. Dialogue was used cleverly by the Maduro government to play for time. However, Venezuela has simply run out of time given the humanitarian disaster, security disaster, and the destruction of means of production in that country. So, time for dialogue as an end in itself, that is now over. I put forward a proposal back in July 2016 as a pact for reconciliation. It was an initiative that numbered a number of goals, and all that has been reduced to nothing by the government that was destroying the country. So what we have to realize, what we have to see, is how to secure the exit of Maduro to see a return to freedoms. We have to negotiate democratic transition. There is a precondition. It means Maduro leaving power, and for the 3 million Venezuelans living abroad, they return to the country.
You were an advisor to the opposition leader, including Leopoldo de Lopez and Antonio de Ledesma. What is it about throwing your weight behind Venezuelan opponents?
Well, it makes one very sad because the respect for the rule of law, for national Venezuelan law and international law simply doesn't exist in a tyranny, so it's impossible to defend all these people. It's something that happened to me on several occasions, and I'm not at all surprised because I have to say that I have identified the true characteristics of this regime, and it continues to create confusion. I know it's a tyranny and arbitrary rules always.
Mr. Gonzalez, you made some statements, and those triggered some contentious debates. You said that military forces had to comply with the constitutional order. But if anyone were to violate the Constitution, you consider that Mr. Maduro was one of them. And in that case, military forces would no longer obey, and Mr. Maduro's administration is based on the support and tolerance of military forces. And as a result, his power would then go awry. If military forces decided to no longer support Maduro's administration, Maduro would no longer have any power. And even though you said that you would not support a military intervention, you still opened the door to such a possibility.
Yes, of course, there's always a measure of confusion. The problem is that Maduro's tyranny today rests on guns, the weapons of the army. If the army decides to withdraw these weapons, tomorrow an intervention from inside or without would not happen. The armed forces must stay in the north and uphold the Bolivarian constitution and therefore the people's sovereignty. The army must not join the repression exerted by the regime with a number of senior army officers who are massively looting the country's resources. Maduro will not be able to survive.
Let us now shift from Venezuela to Europe and the very strong immigration crisis which the continent is now experiencing. Thousands of immigrants would like to reach the European continent, and some people die. Spain harbored the greatest number of immigrants in 2018 compared to other European countries. Do you believe that this process could strengthen certain conservative political parties in the country. What would then be the political consequences?
Migrant flows to Europe are generating a xenophobic reaction and simplistic reactions from the far right. There's no doubt about it. Europe lapsed into a crisis because it didn't have a migration policy in 2015 with 1.2 million migrants coming in. And we saw the collapse of the political response of all political parties, for that matter, a collapse of the European political response in the fate of the migrant crisis. 500 million Europeans were not able to respond in the face of this migration crisis that occurred after the devastating financial crisis in 2008. So we must not yield to the demagoguery of those who call it an invasion. Europe, during the next 30 years, will need migrants, regulated migrant flows, because of the demographic situation.
That's the point. Let's now go on. In the same vein, Luis Marco Agoriano, the Minister of European Affairs in Spain, referred to the consequences of a tough migration policy in Italy with the so-called reemergence of immigration in Spain, and said that Italy was suffering from the consequences of the war in Syria, problems in Libya, and the fact that the EU was abandoning them. And he said that all the countries in the region were all responsible for this migration crisis. He referred to the term joint responsibility. Do you agree with this?
I think there's a good deal of truth in that. Of course, we could mention Greece in the middle of the crisis. In the midst of the bailout, we asked the Greeks to face that migration pressure. The same in Italy. The border of the European Union, that is an area of freedom and freedom of movement of people, the Schengen area, equipped with mechanisms of integration where there is free movement for services, goods, and people. So in that area, the border isn't the border of Italy as a country, or that of Spain or Greece or Germany as a country. No, the European border is the border of all European countries, and the response must therefore be European. I was quite critical as to the absence of a European migration policy. I didn't criticize a particular migration policy because it doesn't exist. I never criticized a particular migration policy. The worst is the absence of migration policy. And the reaction we saw in Italy, well, Italy, like Spain, is a country which for a very long time has been receiving migrant flows in Europe, with the exception of Italy. There are many Italian migrants and, to a lesser extent, a great many Spanish migrants. So Italy's response to migration cannot simply be all these xenophobic speeches that we hear. There's a shared responsibility. Europe has not responded to the migration crisis.
Let us now go on to the Catalonian independence movement, marked by quite a number of important events, the referendum over a year ago and the so-called illegal declaration of independence. What do you think about this, and do you believe that some concessions provided to Catalonia, do you believe that this would be a solution, the autonomous status, as is the case with the Basque country?
Well, it's not that it's viewed as illegal. On the 6th and 7th of September last year in Catalonia, the parliament, on the basis of a minority and a majority, totally illegal, breached the status of autonomy on which power of the autonomous community rests. They breached the constitution and broke the law. Now, don't misread what I'm saying, but constitutionally it was a coup against legality, against the law and constitution. What I criticize the government for whatever its political complexion is, that it didn't act, whereas this illegality was already apparent. It should have acted, and this led us to the current situation. Today, the government is proposing dialogue within a legal framework, dialogue respecting the law with a number of constitutional limits, and that framework allows us to reach common ground. And in exchange for that, in spite of current divisions, the autonomous community that represents the Spanish state in Catalonia, that community doesn't want to adopt the rules of democracy and the constitution. When we attach less importance to that, and that's what we're seeing, there is a deterioration in democracy. People are disappointed with democracy. Some claim there is democracy that is beyond legality.
Mr. Gonzalez, thank you very much for this dialogue with France 24.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate President Macron's government. I've done it personally, but I would like to say this publicly. I'd like to congratulate him for his stand as well as that of the Canadian government. I congratulate them for defending democracy, for upholding democratic values and human rights in Venezuela. I don't think they'll receive much support. I don't know what the strength of my support is, but I thank him for asking the International Criminal Court to mount a fully-fledged investigation on the actions of this tyranny in Venezuela.
Mr. Gonzalez, thank you very much for being with us on France 24, and you can still keep in tune on France24.com.
The Mapuche, Chile's biggest indigenous people, have had enough. They're furious that the government is destroying their forests in Patagonia to build modern infrastructure. Now, they're stepping up their resistance. The Chilean government regards them as terrorists and is cracking down.
The violence comes from the state. It comes from the capitalist system, which causes and reinforces the repression of the Mapuche people.
Is Patagonia about to explode? Don't miss our unprecedented investigation into this historic conflict.
Our special correspondents are the real eyewitnesses of the news. Join me for reporters.